Hello guys and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. Today we're looking at some new cards which are coming out of Duelist pack, Duelist of Pyroxene, and these are going to be supporting Ishizu Ishtar and her new archetypes. So we'll be starting with Keldo, the Possessed Statue. It's a level 4 Earth Attribute Fairy type effect monster with 1200 attack and 1600 defense. You can only use the first and second effects of this card's name once per turn each. One, you can discard one other Earth Fairy monster, special summon this card from your hand, then you can add one Exchange of the Spirit or one card that mentions it from your deck to your hand. 2, as a quick effect, you can banish this card from your field or graveyard, then target up to 5 cards in any graveyards, shuffle them into the deck. If Exchange of the Spirit is not on your field or in your graveyard at activation, you can only target up to 3 cards instead. The main purpose of this card is it's a retrain of the original Keldo. That was a useless card. I'll actually mention it a bit later on. This card has the benefit of being able to just special summon itself, and in doing so you can either search for Exchange of the Spirit or another of those cards. I'm sure there'll be others in that type of effect, so it's quite decent. It's actually a special summon rather than a normal summon, whereas the original version was just a normal summon. The quick effect, just to banish this card from your field or graveyard, and then just being able to shuffle actual cards into the deck. That's actually very useful. Exchange of the Spirit works on the number of cards in your graveyard. The more cards you've got in your graveyard, the more cards that are actually going to become your deck when the Exchange of Spirit actually activates. Medora, the Cestus Oracle, is a level 4 Earth Attribute Fairy type effect monster. It's got 1500 attack and 1800 defense. You can only use the first and second effect of this card's name once each per turn. 1, you can discard one other Fairy type monster, special summon this card from your hand. Then you can place one Gravekeeper's Trap from your deck face up in your spell and trap zone. And 2, as a quick effect, you can banish this card from your field or graveyard and target up to 5 cards in any graveyards, shuffle them into the deck. If Exchange of the Spirit is not on your field or in your graveyard at activation, you can only target up to 3 cards instead. The purpose of the first effect is by just discarding a other fairy monster, you happen to just be able to special summon this, and then you get to search for a Gravekeeper's type of card. It makes sense that Ishizu is basing her deck off the Gravekeeper archetype. I mean, that has many different cards already in existence. Combining the 2 decks shouldn't be too difficult, and it actually works alongside the history of her and her ancestors being the guardians of some of the Millennium items. Second effect is the same as the second effect of the first card, so I'm guessing this is just like a common running theme to them. Agido, the Ancient Sentry, is a level 4 Earth Attribute Fairy type effect monster with 1500 attack and 1800 defense. You can only use the first and second effect of this card's name each once per turn. 1, if a card is sent from the hand and or deck to your opponent's graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand, and then you can special summon one level 4 Earth Attribute Fairy type monster from your graveyard except Agido, the Ancient Sentry. 2, if this card is sent from the hand or the deck to the graveyard, you can send the top 5 cards of each deck to the graveyard. Then if Exchange of the Spirit is in your graveyard, you can send the top 5 cards of either deck to the graveyard. This is more to do with deck manipulation as well. By sending them to the graveyard, you're putting your opponents and your monsters in range so that your opponent has fewer cards in their graveyard. That means their deck becomes very weak when they use the Exchange of the Spirit trap card. Gravekeeper's Trap is a continuous trap card with the effect you can only use the second and third effect of this card's name each once per turn. 1, while Exchange of the Spirit is in your graveyard, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in the graveyard or special summon monsters from the graveyard. 2, during the main phase, you can discard one card, add one Gravekeeper's monster or one Earth Attribute Fairy type monster from your deck to your hand. And 3, during your opponent's draw phase, before they draw, you can declare one card name. Reveal the card your opponent draws for their normal draw, and if it is that declared card, send it to the graveyard. I absolutely love this trap card. I think it's going to be a firm favourite of people just using it and just shutting down their opponent's effects. Gravekeepers are formally and familiar with shutting down your opponent's ability to activate anything from the graveyard, and actually this just helps boost that type of strategy. The first effect, shutting down your opponent's activated effects from the graveyard, or just to be able to special summon from the graveyard, will be enough to cripple most decks that rely on any synergy with their graveyards. Think of things like Sky Strikers. They are reliant on that. There are certain Witchcrafters rely on that. There are so many decks out there. Elemental Heroes, Destiny Heroes, anything along those lines. They all rely somewhere along the line with the graveyard. Secondary effect, just discarding a card, you're able to search for a Gravekeeper or an Earth Attribute Fairy type. Since all of those work in conjunction with each each other, perfectly fine. You know, if you don't happen to have any monsters in your hand at the time and you just need some, exchanging some of your spell and trap cards by just a simple discard means you can exchange and search for exactly what you want. Keep in mind, it doesn't actually limit you to any levels, attack or defense points. It just have to be a Gravekeeper or an Earth Fairy. Everything else is on the table. Third effect, if you're able to guess what your opponent is drawing into, and remember there are certain decks that like to stack their deck in a certain way, by using this effect you're able to just dislodge your opponent's deck and prevent them from drawing. If you've got this paired with things such as Convulsion of Nature, if you pair this with that, you always will guarantee to know what your opponent is drawing, because what it does is it takes your deck, you think this is your deck, and they're all face down. It basically flips them face up. So it puts the bottom of your deck on the top of your deck, and because they're face up now, you can read exactly what card is coming up. I'm sure people are going to be running this strategy. They're going to find gimmicky ways to just even run this card as a standalone just for that third effect. Exchange of the Heart is a normal trap card with the effect you can only activate one card with this card's name per turn. One, if you control 3 or more Earth attribute fairy monsters, send as many monsters on the field as possible to the graveyard. Then each player can special summon monsters from their opponent's graveyard to their field up to the number of monsters that was sent to their opponent's graveyard by this effect. Then, if Exchange of Spirit is in your graveyard, you can set one trap directly from your deck. It can be activated this turn. This is absolutely lethal. You clear your opponent's monsters and your monsters. Bear in mind that all of your monsters, if you've just got these 3 Earth Fairies, their effects don't work in any conjunction with your opponents unless they're playing a mirror match. That means even if they get to summon those monsters and get to use those monsters, the monsters you're getting from your opponent are far more likely to be more powerful. By simply exchanging them and taking them, you're able to then get those cards, and they're going to be decent, they're going to have effects, they're going to have negations, they're going to stop your opponent. If that is not good enough, being able to set a trap card which you can activate on that turn whenever you like for free, it's perfect. It gives you that significant advantage, and this is actually if you look at the anime episode, there was an anime episode, I think this was between Ishizu and Seto Kaiba within the Battle City finals when they were dueling. This type of card was used, and actually the card next to it is also very exciting, and I can't wait to get to it. This is the final of the new cards. It's called a Blast Held by Fate. It's a normal trap card. You can only activate the first and second effect of this card's name each once per turn. One, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, destroy one face-up monster they control with the highest attack, your choice if tied, and if you do, inflict damage to them equal to the destroyed monster's original attack. Then, if Exchange of Spirit is not in your graveyard, you take damage equal to the damage your opponent took. 2, if this card is sent from your hand or deck to the graveyard, you can target one level 4 Earth Fairy monster in your graveyard and add it to your hand. I'd say that the secondary effect is kind of just like a bonus. It's not that effective, it's not that useful, it's just if it happens to be sent, fine, you get to recover one of your Earth monsters, that's fine. First effect is very much to do with the storyline. If you remember that Obelisk was going to be tribute summoned, and then if he had declared an attack, that is Seto Kaiba, with the Obelisk it would have destroyed itself, and Obelisk would have taken those 4,000 life points out of Seto Kaiba's, defeating him. He got some sort of memory back into the past, and he ended up actually tributing over as Obelisk the Tormentor and another monster. I think it might have been like Des Ferrolimp, tributing over those 2 monsters and just summoning it, and because he was able to do that, that kind of negated the effect of this card. Bear in mind that that's the anime effect, this is the actual effect of the card it's trying to recreate. It's very decent. You can think of it like Ring of Destruction without that limitation to it. Ring of Destruction now can only be activated with its errata if your opponent has equal or more life points than the amount you're actually going to take off of them. So beforehand it would be used to finish off games. If your opponent had a Vorse Raider on the field, it had 1,500 life points, your opponent had 1,900 with the Vorse Raider, that would be enough to wipe them out. You can no longer do that with that card. You can absolutely do that with this card, and it instantly goes after your opponent's highest attack monster. That is fantastic. Only issue with it is it has to be during the battle phase when your opponent's monster attacks. So if they wipe this card out before then, it's not like you can actually trigger that effect. The one disadvantage is it does motivate you to have Exchange of the Spirit in your graveyard. If not, you're also taking the damage as well. So that's another point. It is like Ring of Destruction because you're both taking neutral destruction here. So we'll also have a quick look into the other cards which are mentioned and are like retrains for them, the old versions of those cards. First is Exchange of the Spirit. It's a normal trap card. If both players have 15 or more cards in their graveyards, pay 1,000 life points, each player swaps the card cards in their graveyards with the cards in their deck, then shuffles their deck. You can only activate one exchange of the spirit per duel. There's a couple of differences that this card has had. It has been errated, so it has been made worse. It was at a point where it didn't matter how many cards you or your opponent had in your graveyards, you could just swap them out. So if your opponent had basically nothing in their graveyard, then the fewer cards they had, the fewer cards they would have as their deck, whereas if you've got loads of cards in your graveyard, you can just wipe that out. The whole point of these new cards, these retrains, is to be able to manipulate the cards in yours and your opponent's graveyards. By doing that, you meet this 15 card minimum now, whereas before it didn't have that requirement. The other thing is this is now a once per duel effect. It used to be a case of it can be used as many times within a duel as you wanted to, so long as you had the life points, you could basically pay for it. It was decent, but yeah, they just don't want it to be that degenerate. I wonder if there might be a retrain of this at some point. Maybe not now, maybe possibly in the future. We'll have to wait and see. This is the original Agido. It's an Earth Attribute Fairy type level 4 with 1500 attack and 1300 defense. When this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard as a result of battle, roll a 6-sided die. You can special summon one Fairy type monster from your graveyard whose level is equal to the number rolled. If the result is 6, you can special summon a level 6 or higher monster. Decent enough effect. It's a Fairy type, so it can basically go for any of the Fairy type monsters, but it didn't really run that well as a card within the deck. And here is the original Keldo. It's an Earth Attribute Fairy, level 4 with 1200 attack and 1600 defense. Its effect is if this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, target 2 cards in your opponent's graveyard and shuffle them into the deck. Very simplistic effect. It's fine if your opponent is trying to set up things and use their graveyard as like a second hand. That's good because it sends them back to the deck. Otherwise, it's a very weak, meager card, and you can understand why it's got a retrain to it. And the final card is Medora. It's an Earth Attribute Fairy type level 4 with 1500 attack and 1800 defense. Its effect is it gains 200 attack for each fairy monster in the graveyard. Very simplistic effect. It's a battle-based effect. If you've got more fairy monsters in your graveyard, fine, you're getting it to over 2000 attack points, definitely. But it's a very simplistic way. It can be easily overridden by so many destruction effects. It's not even funny these days of how weak and how pitiful this type of card would be. So we can understand now why Ishizu is now getting some retrains, and hopefully why they actually wrap up within the graveyard, within the Gravekeeper archetype. I hope you guys found this insightful. Hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, I'd be really appreciative. Please make sure to subscribe and watch one of the next videos up here. I am going to be doing more videos covering some of the new Yu-Gi-Oh news, and I look forward to seeing you in that next video.